This video is intended to help you understand how to use PMfocus.org. PMfocus.org is a web-based data management system for screening students, providing intervention, and measuring their progress or response to those interventions. To start off, you'll want to go to PMfocus.org, which many of you probably have already done if you're watching this video. This provides good information as far as an overview of the system, what it can do, any news about the system or the website, and contact information. If you click on Create Account or Login, this will take you to the login page where the first time that you use this, you can sign up by entering the email address and your name and password and the state that you work in. If you forget your password ever, you can select Forgot Password and have that refreshed and reset. To log in, once you have that set up, enter your information and it will take you into the system. The first page that you'll land on is this thing called the dashboard. Like the dashboard in your car, this provides you some useful information that you'll want to see first as you make your decisions about what students to support, collecting data, and how those students are responding to the interventions you have in place. When you first log in, you won't have all of this information. It'll provide prompts to you to add that information. But once you have students and interventions set up, this information will be displayed. It shows you over the next 7 days those students that you're scheduled to collect or enter progress monitoring data. I can expand this list to see all those students I have. You can see I have a number of students scheduled to enter progress monitoring data for, and I can collapse that again. So it shows me each student, the area of the intervention for which I need to enter my data, the date that I'm scheduled to collect that data, and I can dismiss that prompt, or I can select collect, and that will take me straight to the collect data page that I will show you later in this video. The next piece of information that is displayed on the dashboard is the objective status. This is a system of clocks that provide me a good snapshot of how the students are responding to the interventions. For each intervention I have, for each student, it gives me a clock. As I get closer to my goal date, the clock will fill up until it's completely full. And if it's red, that means that the student is performing recently at a rate or performing at a level that is below the level I want to see. So I should be worried about that and make some sort of change perhaps to make sure that they're responding more appropriately and performing at a level that I want to see. This is just one indicator, so I certainly want to look at the data more closely and look at their progress chart, which I can do by clicking on that. It'll take me to the intervention, and I can see that information, or I can also look at their progress chart, which I will show you later in the video. If it's green, that means that they're performing at a level that I am happy with, that I want to see that student perform at. The final piece of information on the dashboard is the screening flag section. These are students that I have flagged as needing some sort of additional support or intervention. I'll show you where you flag those students elsewhere in the system. The first thing that I want to do when I get into the system, however, is I need to enter my students. To do so, I click Management in the menu on the left side and Students. Here you can see I have a list of students that I've previously entered. I can edit these students, their information, or I can add a student. I click Add, and it'll add a row at the top where I can add the student's name and their grade level and any information about the student. I can also delete any students that I'd like by clicking on the circle on the left and selecting delete. And then of course I want to click Save to make sure I save that information. The next step that I want to do is identify, if I'm going to be doing any screening of students using this system, I want to identify the benchmarks or standards that I'll be using as a point of comparison in that screening. If I click on Default Benchmarks, this will show me all of the benchmarks or standards or norms that have already been preloaded into this site. This includes standards from DIBELS, DIBELS Next and DIBELS 6th edition, AIMSweb. Those are all for reading, and then also standards for math. We have Florida standards for reading for secondary levels. We can see math standards from AIMSweb and other sources. Dino and Merkin, Burns, Vanderheyden, monitoring basic skills progress, and so on, for writing, for spelling. These are all standards that have been preloaded. If I'm not going to have use for all of these standards. If I am a first grade teacher and I'm using DIBELS, I may want to just select the Reading DIBELS Next Nonsense Word Fluency, Correct Letter Sounds, first grade beginning of the year, and middle of the year and end of the year standards. For each standard, it gives me the cut score and a secondary risk score. I'll show you how that information is used in screening. But I select those benchmarks that I want to have active in the system and I click Save. My benchmark data has been saved. Now if I select my active benchmarks and I click on this drop down, it'll show me all those standards that I have selected to be active in this system. I can also, if there are standards or norms that I would like to add to the system academically or behaviorally that are not preloaded in the system, I can add those here. So I come up with a name for it. And the benchmark, whatever that might be, a certain level of performance. And if I have a secondary risk score, I enter that. I click Save, and that standard is now saved into my active benchmarks. So I can also, if I want to delete a standard that I've previously entered, I can click Delete. Once I have entered my students and benchmarks that I would like to use, I'm now ready for screening. If you're working with a group of students that you have already identified as needing intervention, you may not need to go through this process. But screening is the process of administering some sort of measure of academic or behavior performance to a whole group of students, and based on that measure, comparing with a certain standard and identifying those students that do not meet those standards in order to identify whether they need intervention beyond the instruction that they're receiving. In order to run a screening report, I can select Screening and then New Report. I then need to enter the report name. If I have previously entered information, that'll show up in the drop-down, or I can always add new information by clicking on the plus sign. I'm going to show you one that I've already entered here as a DIBELS screener for reading. And I'm going to select the benchmark that I would like to use as a point of comparison. Then I can enter scores for a list of students that I would like to have show up on this report. You can see I've already entered some scores for these students. I can add additional scores and the errors if that's data that I've collected, and you can see that it's automatically selected that student to show up on this report. I click Save and Next, and it will take me to the report page where it shows me some information based on that report that I just ran. So this is a DIBELS screener for the area of reading. Here's the benchmark that I selected. That benchmark has a benchmark score of 70 and a risk score of 55, and those are the standards of comparison that are used to give me the rest of this information. It gives me some statistics for this group of students, their mean and median scores and accuracy scores. It shows me a breakdown of how the students performed with regards to the to the benchmark standards. And in this case, the percent of students that were above 70, which are in the green or low risk area, those students that were between 55 and 70 or in the yellow or some risk category, and there's one student that was below 55 or in the red or at-risk category. It then gives me some additional information about each student's performance. For each student, it tells me the student name, their score, their accuracy. This is only displayed if I have entered their score and their errors. What quadrant they fall in with regards to accuracy, whether they're inaccurate or accurate, and whether they are fluid or slow readers or performers in the academic or behavior area. It then tells me their risk level, whether that's low risk, some risk, or at risk, or the green, yellow, red categories. The last column is a flagging column based on the screening information that I've collected and any additional information I have. I can select a student by clicking on that flag, and it'll fill in with red to indicate that I've selected that student for additional intervention. Once a student has an intervention set up for this area, in this case it's reading, it'll indicate that I have an intervention set up for that student for reading with a syringe icon. The students that I select or flag here show up on the dashboard under the screening flag section. And from there I can create an intervention. I can always load previously entered screeners by clicking on reports and then selecting that report name to get that information. So my next step, once I've identified the students that I want to provide intervention to, I click on interventions. If I click on list, you can see that I have the list of students that I've already added interventions for, and for some of them they have multiple interventions. I can click on or hover over the area, whether reading, behavior, math, spelling, writing, whatever I've labeled it, and it'll give me the specific information about that objective. I can click on that, and it'll take me to the intervention page that I'll show you how to use in just a moment. I can also add a new intervention for that student, and it will take me to that intervention page ready to be completed. So I can select from my drop-down those students that I can provide intervention to. I'm going to show you a student that I already have created an intervention for. The objective is a summary statement, just a few words, summary of the goal or objective that I'm working towards. If a student has IEP goals, this would be a brief summary of that goal. It's not the entire statement of their present level of performance and the goal that you have, but simply a brief statement. I enter the area, whether that's academic or behavior, and I can click on the plus sign to add a new objective or area. The next step is to add any diagnostic information that I have for the student. As you can see with this prompt, it says fields that are underlined are required, so I need to have information entered in those fields. For any of the fields across this website that you have questions, if you see a little icon with an eye and a blue circle, that's an information icon. I can click on that and it'll give me additional information or a prompt of what I'm supposed to do there, or the information I'm supposed to enter into that field. In some cases it has links to additional documents or information that can be helpful. I'm not going to explain in this screen capture what these diagnostic tools are. There are a number of different diagnostic tools that we could use. I have a couple in here, the can't do, won't do assessment and the instructional level score based on a survey level assessment, that are very helpful information with any academic or behavioral issue. We want to determine whether the student has a skill deficit or a motivation issue and identify their present level of performance, whether they're reading at a 3rd grade level or performing math at a 7th grade level or whatever that might be. I can always add additional information in the notes box based on the diagnostic assessment that I've conducted. I need to enter the instructional level score here, which in this example, Liz Lemon is reading 55 words a minute at a 3rd grade level. The next step is to set up my intervention. I need to enter the frequency with which I'm going to collect the data, the growth rate, or the rate of progress that I'd like to see. In this case, I want Liz to progress at a rate of 2.5 words per minute per week. So I just enter the number 2.5. I don't add any additional labels or anything like that. I enter my goal. In this case, it's 75 words per minute. Again, just the number by itself. No, I don't add any labels or percentage signs or anything like that. I enter the start date of the intervention and the goal date, or the date by which I'd like to reach my goal that I've set up, and the measurement, which in this case is Dibble's oral reading fluency. I can add any additional information in the notes box. This is where I can specify what the intervention is that I'm doing, or what support I'm providing to the student to help them make progress. I can also write out the entire PLAFUP statement, or statement on the student's present level of performance and the goal that I'm working toward. The next step is to set up my intervention, or to label the phases or different interventions that I'll be using. We typically want to start with a baseline phase where we're not implementing an intervention but simply measuring the student's present performance before implementation of an intervention. It's then broken up according to phases. These phases can be different phases of one intervention or different interventions altogether. In this case, I started off with having the student practice their reading, and we'll measure progress in response to that intervention. That's probably a pretty weak intervention, but that will work for this example. If I collect data and see that the student is not responding to that intervention, I can come back and say, well, I'm going to try a different intervention. In this case, sight words. There are specific words the student is struggling with, so I'm going to have her practice those words. So the data in progress monitoring is separated out and associated with a specific phase that I'll select, so I can see their response to a specific intervention or a specific phase of an intervention. I can click Save, and it'll indicate that the intervention was saved successfully. I can click Save and New and add another intervention for this student or another student, or I can clear the information, or I can delete the intervention over on the left side here, or I can click Save and Collect Data. This will take me to the data collection page. I can also access this page by clicking on Progress Monitoring and Collect Data. So that's the stage I've reached now. I'm ready to, I've selected the student, I've added an intervention for that student, and I now want to progress monitor or enter the progress monitoring data for that student. So I have Liz Lemon already selected here, but I can select the student and the objective that I want to enter progress monitoring data for. It gives me the overview of the intervention that I set up, and I can always edit that from here. But on the bottom is where I enter my progress monitoring data. I have some data already entered here, but I can add data, and I select the date. And the phase this score is associated with, based on those phases that I entered, or maybe it's a baseline phase. I'm going to select baseline here, and their score. Any additional notes that I want to add, I can add notes here with regards to that day, or maybe something, there was an assembly that day, or the student didn't get sleep the night before, any information that might be helpful in interpreting the score. It then prompts me to indicate the fidelity. Fidelity is an important concept. We know that students cannot benefit from interventions they do not receive. So if an intervention is not carried out appropriately or at all, obviously that score for that time period will probably not reflect their response to the intervention. So I want to just give an overall indication of whether the intervention was carried out with fidelity or not, or you can say that it doesn't apply. You don't want to enter the fidelity measure for that time period. I can click Save or Save Data and View Graph, and it will take me to the progress monitoring chart for that student. I can access this chart as well by clicking on New Student Report and selecting the student and the objective for which I'd like to see it. Here you can see the chart indicating the student's response to the various phases. I have on the y-axis, this is my measurement of oral reading fluency. The x-axis here is an overview of the area and the objective that I'm displaying here. And it's broken up according to the phases. So this blue data, these blue data are the data associated with the baseline, and you can see that her performance is pretty consistent between 55 and 60. I implemented the first intervention, and you can see that there wasn't really much progress there. I then implemented the second intervention, working on sight words, and you can see there was a big jump in the performance and response to the intervention. So that's probably a good indicator that that intervention is pretty effective. And in fact, I'm making progress toward and almost reaching my goal of 75 words per minute as indicated by this green line. I can also view the aim line, which is my desired rate of progress that I had, which was 2.5 words per minute per week, and compare the students' growth to that. I can compare their trend line of their data, or the average progress of their data, and compare that with the aim line that I had set up. I can, this chart in this example is already saved, but if I want to save a report so that I can access it quickly in the future without having to select the student and the objective, I can select Memorize, and it will show up in the saved report. Oops, let me show that again. I can select Memorize, and that report will now be saved in the saved report section for easy access in the future. So I can click on View and it will take me back to that report. Another feature that is available is something called a horizon report, or a horizon line chart. I can look at a student and multiple interventions or objectives for a given student, or multiple objectives across students. So I can say I want to see Jack's reading intervention, Elaine's reading, and Lindsay's behavior. Or I can select from the, I can filter by area and say just show me all of the behavior, and I can create the graph. Any objectives that have less than 3 data points will not display. The way that this chart works is it shows me the recent progress of students, or recent response to the intervention. So green is good, red is bad. The dark line, the horizon line at 100, that's the rate of progress for that individual intervention or objective. So if for a student I have a rate of progress of 2 words per minute per week, or of increase in behavior compliance 10% per week, whatever that growth rate that I set up with the intervention is, that is represented by 100%. So if the student is progressing over the last 3 data points at a rate beyond that rate, it's going to be above that line and in green. So Michael Bluth in this behavior area is progressing at a rate twice, or 200%, twice the rate of the growth rate that I had set up. If they're responding at a rate lower than or slower than that desired rate, it's going to be red, and the larger that red column is, the worse off, or the slower the rate of progress is for the student. I can save this chart as well by selecting Memorize Graph, and that will save that in the Saved Report section. Finally, the Support section in the menu This has a lot of helpful information as you use this system. It provides an overview of a lot of the information that you'll need to understand to use it effectively, and additional information about screening, the reports, the assessments, the can't do, won't do assessment, determining an instructional level, data collection frequency, the weekly growth rates, information that will be helpful as you use this. If you have any additional questions or concerns, you can contact us at pmfocus@updc.org. pmfocus.org is a great resource that I hope you'll find helpful as you collect data to identify struggling students, provide them interventions, and measure their progress and response to those interventions, whether they be academic or behavior. It's intended for use with students who might have disabilities or have special education supports, as well as students who have do not have a disability, but for whom we would like to provide some additional support for some reason. This tool can be used on your computer as well as your tablet devices, and I hope that it's helpful to you, and wish you good luck in your progress monitoring.